You're watching France 24 and live from Paris and time now for Focus. And tonight we're looking at elections in Jordan. The vote is the country's first since the Arab Spring rocked much of the region. Protests in Jordan were less widespread than elsewhere, but they did force King Abdullah II to make some concessions. Not enough, though, for the powerful Muslim Brotherhood, one of a handful of parties to call for a boycott. That did, though, leave the way open for independent and tribal candidates. State television is indicating that they have taken most of the 150 seats on offer.
There were no surprises in the results of the Jordanian elections. The Independent Electoral Commission announced that candidates representing rural tribes were out in front.
The candidate with the most number of votes in the first electoral district and takes 5 seats is Khalil Atiyah. The candidate with the most number of votes in the second district is Al-Hassan Musakuz.
Khalil Atiyah and Raed Al-Hassan Musakuz are pro-regime and close allies of King Abdullah. It's because of this perceived cronyism that the Muslim Brotherhood boycotted the elections, the largest political party to do so.
For those who believe that Jordan is entering a time of positive change, those who believe that this is part of a so-called reform, well, they're in a dream world. These elections are a failure.
Out of 150 seats available in Parliament, only 27 can be taken by candidates belonging to political parties. Such a small number makes it impossible for any opposition figures to win a majority and demand reform.
Real reform comes when there is a real partnership between political parties and when the opposition is popular with voters. That keeps up the pressure and should bring the reforms we so badly need.
One change demanded by Jordanians is that Parliament should truly represent all people from across the board. Yet the Prime Minister doesn't want to give away too much too fast.
A democracy means first you have to get elected to Parliament. Once you're in, then you can talk about reform.
For the last 2 years, at the behest of the Muslim Brotherhood, many people have been demonstrating regularly, demanding social and political justice.
We hope that the next parliament will be able to reduce the economic burden that weighs so heavily on Jordan's poorest people.
I hope some reforms will be implemented to improve people's living conditions, but I don't expect it to happen. The people have no confidence in the authorities anymore.
When the Arab Spring threatened to spread to Jordan 2 years ago, King Abdullah introduced some reforms that were perceived to be half-hearted measures. For example, now, for the first time ever, he'll consult Parliament before choosing his Prime Minister.
And Kate Williams prepared that video piece for us. Now, for more on this, we can cross over to James Andre in Oman, who is there. He's there for France 24. Now, James, the big turnout really has been, the big question has been the issue of turnout. Is the number of voters that have voted, is that vindicating the king?
Well, actually, it's quite a bit of success for the king. Indeed, 56.6% might not sound much, but when the whole of the opposition is boycotting, it's a pretty good figure. The 50% threshold has been passed, of course, and then that is a better figure than in 2010 and better than in 2007. So, indeed, it does appear, at least when you look at that figure, that the king has won his bet, and that indeed part of the population, at least, is buying his reform system, which is ongoing. This is what he says. He says it's a progressive reform towards more democracy, and it has to be said that, of course, the tribes here in Jordan are extremely powerful. You've got to remember the country has over 60% of the population who are from Palestinian origin, and the native Jordans want to keep a big share of the power. So, of course, it's impossible to reform everything straight away, but still, it does appear that the Muslim Brotherhood have not really won yesterday. It was more, the victory was more on the side of the king.
Now, as you mentioned there, most of the serious opposition did boycott the vote. So what is likely to be the makeup of the new parliament?
Well, actually, the new parliament is going to look a lot like the old parliament. Indeed, for example, these 27 seats, the national lists, that the national list could try and get one of these 27 seats, when indeed there were 61 national lists running for these 27 seats, and most of them are driven by either first-time politicians, if you like, who are trying to get a seat for the first time and who are businessmen who are close to the throne, or indeed a lot of tribal leaders, tribal members. It is important to say that here in Jordan, most people will vote for members of their own tribe or friends or people they know, people who are close to them and who have promised things to them quite directly. And this is the big problem for the Muslim Brotherhood. Indeed, most of the seats are simply given out by a first-past-the-post circumscription system, which means that it's pretty much impossible for a national party to get in. And if you take the results, well, for example, the biggest result was for an Islamist list that got 3 seats, but then the second, third, fourth that got 2 seats, they're all like, for example, tribe members who are close to the king. And for example, if you take that 4th seat, that's an interesting one. It's a man here nicknamed the captain, because he has an airline company, and indeed he was arrested on allegations of fraud just before the election, and he was actually in jail during election, and then won his seat. He even got 2 seats, which is a
We apologise for those technical issues. We'll try and get back to James Andre, but just a reminder of the top stories that we're covering, as well as those elections in Jordan. That is, of course, the return to France of Florence Cassé. After having spent 7 years behind bars in Mexico, she has now touched down here back in France. She got a hero's welcome, it has to be said, but however, that doesn't mean that her release was particularly well received in Mexico. Do stay tuned to France 24. We've got more news and headlines in just a few minutes.